right, good evening and welcome to the Propaganda Podcast. This is the 7th podcast of the 3rd season. The Propaganda Podcast, just to say a little about it, is by The Moral Economy. The Moral Economy is a group of activists, artists, and, armchair revolutionaries. What do you get inside? Yeah, 2 of them are right here.
Yeah. Armchair reformist.
Armchair reformist. That's right. So the Propaganda Podcast is done by The Moral Economy, and the purpose of the Propaganda Podcast is to sort of get at the everyday propaganda that we hear all over the place, and maybe put a little philosophical twist on it. And this week we have a special podcast because last week was the week of the G20, and we want to sort of give a rundown of what happened at the G20, what happened at the protests, and discuss a few questions such as the media representation of the protests, whether violence at protests is justified, and also the left response of the protests.
Good, and also keep in mind, we do this podcast from Hamburg, so we were there.
Yeah, that's an important point.
Yeah.
We were in the protests throwing beer bottles at... No, we weren't.
No, we weren't doing that.
But we were throwing Molotov cocktails.
we didn't throw anything.
We didn't throw anything. But we were there, and I did get hit by the police a few times, so...
Yeah, you also got wet, right?
I got wet. I got tear gas mixed with water in my eyes. Someone knocked the beer out of my hand so that they could use the bottle to throw at the police. I was quite peeved by that. So, but yeah, without further ado, I'll move on to Chell, who will give a little chronology.
Introduce ourselves?
Yeah, we should probably do that.
Let's do that.
Yeah. Well, I'm Rainbow Hat Guy Andrew.
And I'm your agonist, Chell.
And this is Sean, an associate of the previous 2 names.
I'm Yana. I'm just a girl who passed by, and I'm very excited about this podcast.
I'm Nawaz, and I'm the protagonist.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Awesome. Okay, yeah. Now, without further ado.
Okay, yeah, so I just want to run you through a few of the sort of events and demonstrations that took place over the course of the week, just so you can have some sort of idea what went on. So it started on Sunday, the 2nd of July, which was more or less a week before the G20 took place, with the protest wave, which was a symbolic mass demonstration. Started at the Rathaus Markt, and 12 o'clock.
And I can say that 18,000 people showed up to that
18,000 people showed up to the protest wave. Okay, cool. Then on Tuesday, the 4th of July, America's birthday.
Yeah, it's a day that we all forget.
A day that we never remember, I think. So there was a workshop called the Summit of the Mini Opening Wish Store, which I'm not familiar with, but it's a wish store, and they had workshops and debates. It took place between 4 and 8 p.m. There was also Hard Corner, Reclaim the Streets. Navas, you guys
I think we should put in a word about the fact that, the 2nd of July the wave protest, it was largely peaceful.
Yeah.
Right, almost 20,000 people.
Right.
Took different, I would say, avenues to convey their disagreement with not just that G20 is happening in Hamburg, but also with what G20 constitutes. And it was largely peaceful. No untoward incident whatsoever was reported. I think that's important.
Yeah, we should point that out because we're talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Good. So then, there was a summit of the Mini opening wish store. Then there was also on the 4th of July the Hard Corner, Reclaim the Streets. So cornering is what the young people in Hamburg do on the weekend to save money, I guess. So instead of going to clubs that cost money, they just get beer from like the kiosk or the gas station and then sit on the corner. And there's like thousands of people there.
And I'm going to butt in here. It was on the 4th of July, the America's independence, freedom, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
In Germany, we're allowed to drink beer on the streets.
Yeah. So everybody sits on the street.
That's real freedom.
It's awesome. I mean,
That's real freedom.
It actually doesn't just happen at this one day. It happens every day.
Yeah, it happens every day.
That's right.
So usually we have it like every Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And this time it was just for a reason. So there were a little bit
most of
more
us do it
people,
like
but-
once a week already.
Yeah, cornering is an interesting phenomenon. It's sort of celebrating the fact that we can drink outside here, and if you can drink outside, why not congregate with a group of your friends and buy a beer for €1 from the kiosk and play some music and sit outside in the sun and enjoy your evening that way, as opposed to going in some expensive, stupid club where everything's dark and you can't hear each other talk.
Because that's anti-capitalist, Sean.
True, could be. But on this particular occasion, it was very nice that they created an event surrounding the G20 about just being able to celebrate this fact that it wasn't necessarily a political protest. It was simply an event to show that the young people are still going to live their lives and have their fun on the street and drink their beer and ignore this. For me, it was a time to ignore the whole hoopla surrounding this event and the protests.
And still, this event was already interrupted by the police. I have to mention on that.
And water cannons. They came in and sprayed everybody.
Totally.
That's what everybody to go home. That's great.
And
they were just
didn't
sitting on the
stop
corner.
them.
They were just eating,
Drinking
fries and drinking beer on the corner in the sun. And boom, it's like, go home. Here's the water cannon.
But that was sort of the first signal to me, at least, that the police were going to take a certain tact regarding the whole protest. And even though this was something that happens all the time, this cornering, it happens constantly, and the police usually ignore it, and it's because it's totally legal. There's not really a problem. Sometimes the neighbors complain, but that gets worked out. But in this case, it showed me that the police were clearly going to have a sort of no tolerance policy, which is what they said as well. And no tolerance for what? I don't know. They probably claimed one person threw a bottle, and that was justification to clear out 1,000 people from cornering. But that was a sort of a signal already to a lot of the young people that the police were playing hardball.
Yeah, I actually have an official statement of one of the police guys, because they came like with like 300 of people, and they were all masked, and it was like a very, very nice view to just chill there and have a lot of policemen around you, just kicking you away from the street, like, hey, make space, whatever. And so I went to one of them and I was like, hey, bro, what are you doing here? Do you want to clean the streets or something? Because we could like help so that no one is going to be hurt. And he was just like, no, why don't you start talking to me? And I was like, yeah, I just wanted to ask what you're doing here. And he was like, yeah, you're not allowed to sit here. And I was like, we're sitting here every day. It's just nothing special about it. And he was like, yeah, but not every day is like today.
Well,
and that is like the main idea of what has happened around these days. That it was just not normal, so that normal things have been restricted, which usually would have.
I have a question about it. I mean, it was just something that Germans do all the time.
Yeah.
But was it a hamburgers, especially because we're awesome.
Yes.
But was it like a registered protest?
No.
Definitely not.
Okay.
Definitely not.
Okay.
That's just chilling out.
I mean, if you read the where, it says for the hard corner, it says everywhere.
exactly.
There was in Altena and Oltensen was one particular square where the people were, but that's also a very common thing. And there's several bars in the square, and every summer day there's tons of people there. And the other one was in this area near Neue Pferdemarkt, near Schanzenviertel, where that's sort of where cornering started. That corner there in front of that kiosk is essentially where it started. So for me, it was nothing more than it was what happens every other day. There was probably just more people than general on this particular day, and it's in some way associated with the G20 protests. I mean, as you can see, it's on this list we have of protests for the G20. So even though it was a normal action, it was sort of linked to this protest, and I think that's why it caught the notice of the police.
And still, it's something really peaceful where the police brought a lot of aggression in, which was not supposed to be there. And
unnecessary.
Yeah, totally
Well,
unnecessary.
we're only on the second day now, actually. So
We only got to Tuesday. The G20 has not yet started. The G20 starts 4 days from now.
Well, actually, we did forget to mention the protest camps.
Well, that happened on the 4th as well. That was the same night as hard corner.
Okay, they started on the second, but okay.
Yeah. So there were protest camps. So there were a number of parks in Hamburg, and protesters had applied to be allowed to set up camps there, and they had permission to set up camps there. There was a little bit of a legal back and forth between various levels of courts, but in the end, it was decided that they're allowed to have the camp, but because the camp is a political organization, and that's protected in the German Constitution. However, you're not allowed to sleep in the camps because sleeping is not political speech. So you can do anything that's political, but you can't sleep. So that was the win. And then the police used this as an excuse to more or less shut these camps down by people would erect tents because, of course, people had planned to sleep there. And then the police would say, no, sorry, these tents, you cannot sleep here. And then they came in with force, way too much force. I think they sent 1,000 cops to one park in order to get rid of 11 tents. And they were apparently extremely violent. And I have a friend of mine was there, and he told me that the police were punching people and using tear gas, and it was just totally ridiculous. There were maybe 50 protesters or people trying to make a camp, and there were about 1,000 police, and it was ridiculous. In fact, it was so ridiculous that a right-wing newspaper in Hamburg also said that it was ridiculous. I guess the Mopo is right-wing, as far as I know, right? And maybe I'm wrong.
No, it's more centrist.
Centrist. Okay, well, a centrist newspaper, but they usually are. They've been very critical. Yeah, well, it's a tabloid. But up until the G20, they had been super critical of the left. And then the police, shut down this camp in Werder, and then the Mopo said, "Hey, whoa, that was way too far, police."
But one point, just to jump in, just to give some context about why were these people camping there to begin with. I mean, that shows you that how many people from outside of Hamburg came to this protest. People from all over Germany, people from all over Europe came. And a lot of the people that wanted to protest, obviously, there were thousands of people that are not from Hamburg, and so they needed places to sleep, and it made sense for them to set up tents somewhere, and that's pretty strictly controlled by the police around here.
Yeah, and at the camp in Altona, another neighborhood in Hamburg, they organized in response to the rule that they weren't allowed to sleep because sleep is not political speech. They organized a sleep-in against the Schlafverbot, which is not being allowed to sleep. So a sleep-in against not being allowed to sleep, which I think is very clever because they basically politicized sleep. They transformed sleep into a kind of political form of protest
That's
or political
beautiful.
speech. Unfortunately, it was too late to have the rule changed, so they were still not allowed to sleep, and the camps were mostly disassembled.
Did you want to touch on what happened, where these people ended up sleeping, and how? So there ended up being a huge number of organizations that rushed out to offer these people that wanted to sleep other places to sleep. So instead of going to a public park, they went to churches and went out to, for example, the front yard and a big open area in front of the church. They set up their camps there, or there was a theater that offered places too.
There was also a Facebook group where you could say, "I have a couch or whatever,"
Essentially a couch.
or "I have this much space. You guys can come sleep on the floor."
Yeah.
And I did that too. So
I think it's really important to say about that you cannot count the people who came from abroad by counting the camps, because also in the university we had like a lot of papers hanging around like, okay, if you have to have a couch to offer like a room or something, just do it. And they had like 10 people in their room or something.
I think St. Pauli Football Club also provides.
Yes, yeah.
A lot. St. Pauli Church.
At the stadium.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually have a list of the sleeping places. I don't know. I mean, well, they were in St. Pauli, Fanräume, die Gängerviertel, Rote Flora, Centro Soziale, Café Knallhart, Hafenstraße, Sauerkrautfabrik, Fuchs Kaserne, and a queer space at Villa Magdalena K. But,
Cool.
But you had a guy in your apartment, right? Did he come?
I had a guy in my apartment. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
A journalist.
Oh, okay, cool. Good. So let's move on to the 5th of July, Wednesday. So on the 5th, there was an alternative summit at Kampnagel, which is a theater, let's say. And
Alternative theater.
alternative theater. They do some like modern dance stuff.
Well, they also do a lot of refugee support things. I mean, I think.
They do a lot of different stuff,
Yeah.
also media.
Cultural center.
Yeah, cultural center.
Yeah.
Yeah, more like that.
Yeah, it was organized by the International Summit on Global Solidarity, and they basically held a number of speeches and talks as a sort of a summit against the G20 summit, or an alternative summit. Also on the 5th of July was the performance of 1,000 Figures. This was an art performance. Do you want to describe it? Anybody want to
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No.
Yeah, this was the art performance where citizens could sign up on their website and come dressed up as zombies. And this was right in the heart of the city. They had cameras. They were recording it. They were professional choreographers who were sort of, directing them to walk and to act and to pretend as dead people or zombies, people risen from their deaths. And that was their way of sort of getting back at the sort of politics that G20 promotes, that encourages exploitation, war, and extortion of parts of the earth, non-fortunate parts of the earth.
Yeah, I mean, so they were zombies. They were gray. They were covered in gray.
That's what I think.
But and then they took off underneath. They were wearing colorful clothes, and at the culmination of the action, they took it off. They took off all of their gray, and then they were all jumping and hugging and dancing in their colorful clothes.
It was a very good performance, actually. Yeah,
good. And also on the 5th of July, on Wednesday, there was the dance protest. I'd rather dance plenty than G20.
I just want to break in. The German is lieber 20 als G20.
Yeah.
I'm glad they found a rhyme in English with that.
Yeah. It was also called demo rave, I believe. Yeah, and at least that's what I've been calling it. I was there. It was great. It was a dance demonstration. There were I think 20,000 people or more that attended. There were a number of sort of trucks, and the trucks played music and went along with the march, and you could dance to electro
trance and drink beer and just baze them away.
Yeah, it was great. It was also very peaceful. There were few police there, so that's the 5th. And moving on to the 6th, Thursday, the 6th of July, there was another alternative summit. The summit at Copenhagen continued for a second day, again from the International Summit on Global Solidarity. And then on Thursday was also the Welcome to Hell protest, which took place at St. Pauli Fish Market. They planned to march up towards the Messehallen, where the G20 was actually taking place, which is a place that they're not allowed to go. But they didn't get that far because after about 100 meters, I think they planned to go about 6 kilometers through the city. But after 100 meters, the protest was shut down by police, and it was pretty brutal. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the Welcome to Hell.
Yeah, so that is where it started.
Yeah, that's where it really started. So
this was also just to put in, just my 2 cents. This was the protest that advertised itself as Welcome to Hell, and the police was expecting that this was going to be the most violent of the protests, with an expected, 10,000. They're expecting 8 to 10,000 people ready to be violent within this protest march, which is why it was not even allowed to move until for the 3.5 hours, where it actually, after which they're not even allowed.
So the protest was officially approved to go forward. The entire route was approved, but this was the protest that was also organized by the people at Rote Flora and the entire left-wing scene. And this is the protest that brought out a lot of the people from all over Europe that were let's call them anarchists, that were ready to be violent. And this was the protest, and now it's getting a lot of criticism that they called it Welcome to Hell, because critics of the protest are saying that they planned to be violent from the very beginning. The police definitely took that approach as well and assumed that this group and this protest was not going to go peacefully, which is why they stopped it after a few meters. On the pretext that some people in the crowd had their faces covered, which is illegal according to Hamburg law. For a protest, you cannot have your face covered, and that was the pretext for the police to stop the protest, which started the violence.
I'm not going to say it was probably a self-fulfilled prophecy too. If you break up a group of people who are maybe willing to perpetuate violence, well, when they go away from the protest, they're going to go perpetuate violence and in splinter groups that are harder to control.
And there's a ton of video of this protest online. There's hours of video of this protest online, and I think most media outlets, at least at the time, on the 6th of July, the day of the protest, or maybe the 7th, the next day, really put a lot of the blame on the police for escalating the violence. A number of my friends were there. I was not at this protest. But I've also heard stories that the police, in fact, you can almost there's a good reason to believe that the police had planned escalation from the very beginning, because the protest was approved, as Sean said, but the destination was really close to the red zone, the zone that nobody was allowed to go, and there's no reason to expect that the police would actually have let them get that close. So the police ostensibly approved the protest and the end destination with knowing that they would break it up, because if they didn't think they were going to break it up, they would not have let them say that they were going to end next to the red zone. They would have demanded that the police would have asked the protesters to choose another place, another ending place. Yeah. So the police said, okay, yeah, sure, you can end right next to the red zone, because the police knew from the very beginning that they were not going to let the protest proceed.
That's very likely.
And so I think there's good reason to believe that the police deserve a large share of the responsibility for the escalation of violence that occurred for this protest specifically. But good. Okay, so Friday the 7th, Block G20, color the red zone. So this was a direct action against the red zone. The idea was to basically try to enter the red zone by nonviolent means, I believe. I believe this was organized by the interventionist left. And they tried to enter the red zone from a number of different directions, and they were of course stopped by police because the red zone was off limits. And the idea was to block the G20 from happening. The G20 did happen, so they did not block the G20. There's some really interesting videos of that protest as well. Then there was the education strike, which began at Dijktorplatz at 10:30 a.m. And the idea was for people, especially involved in education, so academics as well as teachers, as well as professors, to go and protest there. And I don't know. I think this one was peaceful. I haven't heard much about it in the news. There was also the shutdown, the logistics of capital, which took place in the harbor area. I'm not too familiar about this protest. Does anybody know?
It was around, I think it was anywhere between 400 to 700 people, and they protested around the south of the river that Hamburg's port is located on. It was largely peaceful. Which is why it also did not receive a lot of media attention, I guess.
Did this include the Greenpeace protest?
Exactly, that is exactly.
They had boats in the harbor where they had large, hilarious depictions of Trump and other leaders.
Well, no, that was a protest wave. That was the first day.
Okay.
Because that was very different people. There were people in boats in the lake. There were folks in the harbor that tried to paint a ship coming in, but they were stopped off by the Coast Guard. That was the protest wave on the first day, on Sunday, the 2nd of July.
Okay.
But this also involved Greenpeace boats, but they were largely peaceful. They went along just carrying their banners and their big balloons on the boats with the Coast Guard.
Right. Cool. Also on Friday the 7th, which by the way was the first day of the G20, I should probably say that, was the colorful critical mass. This was a bike demonstration, a bike protest. So on the last Friday of every month in Hamburg, there's critical mass where you basically bike around the city with a couple thousand other bikers and block traffic and agitate for having a city that's more bike friendly and less car friendly. And they decided to organize an anti-G20 protest for anti-G20 bike protest, and I was there. There was about 5,000 to 7,000 people, and it was very peaceful and very cool. I think it was an extremely successful protest.
I really want to add to this that usually every single month there are around 2,000 to 5,000 people on the street doing that protest. So it's always peaceful, and it's just about having a greener city and just show that the Hamburg people are very interested in taking part in their politics.
Yep.
And just another point on the critical mass. So typically that's not something that needs to be announced the entire route, because it's written in law that if you have enough bikes on the street, then you can essentially take over the lane. And so that's why it's called critical mass. In this case, it was actually it was registered. The organizers of this demonstration registered it. It was never officially approved. So it was never, the route that they chose was never approved. So they didn't really have official approval, but it was sort of allowed by the police. So it was known by people that took part that of course you're going to ride past police the entire way, and they were sort of going to let it happen, but it had never been officially approved. But regardless, it was almost entirely peaceful. I say almost entirely. There were some things I experienced at the end that were not so peaceful, as some police were trying to get through the crowds of bikes. Some of them got quite agitated and pushing, shoving people onto the ground. But other than that, for the most part, it was an extremely peaceful demonstration.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, it was a beautiful day, which is rare in Hamburg in July. And so
You also had that guy with the trumpet, who was also wearing a T-shirt with something about Trump, and he was, shouting out loud that I got this T-shirt made.
Oh yeah.
Remember the
I
guy?
was so angry that I got this
Exactly.
t-shirt made.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. But anyway, I mean, it was also because all the roads were blocked and there were no cars around. It was really the perfect day for a critical mass. So and again, a very successful, peaceful protest. Then also on Friday the 7th of July was the G20 Sink Capitalism, which was a demonstration on the Reeperbahn at 8 p.m. And I don't think I heard a single thing about it. Does anybody know? Has anybody heard about that?
Nothing.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe it didn't even take place.
I was busy riding my bicycle.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Because
That went rather late.
because the bicycle one started at 7 p.m. So yeah, that's probably why.
It went at least 3 hours.
Probably longer.
Probably longer.
Yeah. There's the. Okay, and then Saturday, the second day of G20, was the Borderless Solidarity, not G20. This was the big protest. This is the biggest one. About 100,000 people showed up, and it started at Dijktorplatz, and they walked to Millentorplatz, which if you don't live in Hamburg, you have no idea what either of those platzes. But there was 100,000 people. It was also totally peaceful. It was, there was music, and they had set up a stage at the end point and food stands. So at the end there was live music and speeches and food, and it was a really wonderful protest.
Yeah, I think all around it was seen as a very successful and fun protest even. Because at the end they did have all these events and different groups congregating, offering food. We played with the phone cubes, cubes at each other while listening to music. It was very fun.
Yeah. It was a great.
But at the same point, there was also the other Hamburg Zeithaltung. Also, that was happening. That took a different route, and ended at the Fischmarkt. Exactly. Yeah, that went through the Hafenstrasse and then ended at the Fischmarkt. So there were these two big protests. They claimed that they had more than 25,000 people, and this protest claims that they had more than 100,000 people. So that's
quite big.
Yeah, that's a lot of people on the streets, and all these people have one thing in common. I mean, they're different. They represent very different political agendas, very different social movements, but all of them had one thing in common. That was G20 is not allowed in Hamburg.
Yeah. And also, they were all peaceful. At least during the protest or throughout the day, they were extremely peaceful. Even Saturday night, there was definitely not as much violence as Friday night, which we should probably talk about. But that was Saturday. That was the sort of the overview. On Sunday, there's Nobody Forgotten, Nothing Forgiven, which was an anti-repression demonstration in response to police violence. There was also the Clean Up Hamburg, which was 10,000 people showed up to clean up Hamburg, and it was a pretty cool action because they wanted to clean up the city. But on the other hand, maybe they took it. I heard stories about people taking toothbrushes to clean areas of the city.
Well, it was definitely more symbolic. It was more symbolic than anything, but it was also a spontaneous action.
Yeah, it was a spontaneous one. It was
announced just on Friday. I think it started on Facebook, and it spread so rapidly that this small area of Hamburg, the Schanzenviertel, had nearly 10,000 people came to clean it up. So regardless of whether they actually did too much cleaning, there are some nice videos out there of it. I imagine a lot of people sure, some people were walking around with toothbrushes, but they did wipe graffiti off the walls, and it looks from the videos, it looks like it was a nice event, regardless of whether it was, whether there was any greater purpose. It was supposed to be non-political.
It was mainly an event to show that people want to show their action by supporting the city and creating something rather than destroying something and be aggressive. So they actually took their position in the opposite of what has happened the days before, to say, hey, we're not part of it. And if we want to do something in a political way, we want to create something and not destroy something else. So that's why also a lot of families came out and a lot of children. That's why you have this many beautiful pictures of just people working together, making the city more beautiful.
So maybe we could talk about some of the non-announced protests.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sean, now that we've gone through it, you were right in the middle of the non-announced
maybe
protest.
you could tell Sean a little bit about where you live and what was going on there.
Well, yeah, so I live in Schanzenviertel, which is sort of the center of where most of the violence, most of the attacks between the various attacks between the police and the protesters, where most of them took place. That's where things really got out of control, and it really did feel like anarchy for most of the night.
I object to that as an anarchist, but I will let you keep going.
Yeah, as an anarchist,
I don't mean that as a political term. I mean that as an observer's term.
It's chaos.
Chaos. Let's call it chaos.
Yes, violent
I shouldn't
chaos.
use the political term. So let's call it violent chaos. For a large portion of Friday night, at least, there were no police in Schanzenviertel. They were staying on the outside, staying on the ring, while things inside started to heat up, both literally and figuratively, as barricades were burned, fires were started. Lots and lots of people dressed all in black with their faces covered seemed to be the instigators of the burning the barricades and essentially destroying the neighborhood. Everything from destroying the street and signposts to actually breaking glass down and entering and what's the word I'm looking for?
Looting.
Yeah. So there was a wild looting action that took place to many shops in the neighborhood. So just to give some context, though, Thursday night already there started to be some violence. People that were dressed in black were already breaking windows and things like that. The police took action. They were a bit late to the scene, but they at least chased those people out. Whether they arrested very few from the numbers that we see. But Friday night was the much bigger night, where the protests sort of congregated around Neue Pferdemarkt, and the police sort of came in to break it up. I should also say that in Neue Pferdemarkt there's a park that just had its inauguration, let's call it. So this park, it's now called Aravati Park, and it's sort of a social scene where it's always been a place where people have congregated, and through some organization, they've sort of turned it into a place where migrants are and any sort of refugees are very open. They hand out these urban citizenship cards. It's sort of a place for. They have a kitchen where you can get free food. Someone's making food for you. So it's sort of like a social thing that's very open. And this is where the protests really started Friday night, especially where the violent protests started there. The police came in and immediately with water cannons dispersed the crowd, and it basically pushed the crowd up the main street through Sternschanze into the center of Sternschanze on the street Schulterblatt, right in front of the Rote Flora, which is the center of the entire left-wing protest. Essentially, it's sort of their church, if you want to call it that. So essentially, all the protesters were pushed onto one particular street, and the police had blocked off both sides of the street, and things just simmered there for a long time, 2 or 3 hours. I was on the street, and I spent about 2 hours there watching things sort of unfold. There were thousands and thousands of people on the street, and I have to say the vast majority of them were people that might be there on any other given night. They were there in the bars, in the cafes, drinking a beer on the street, chatting with their friends. When the weather's nice, that street is always full with people. Everything just sort of flows out onto the street. You have bars and restaurants which are full, but it's very common that people sit out on benches or in chairs or stand around on the street drinking. At this point, though, the people that were clearly there to start violence or cause chaos, people that were dressed all in black, had their faces covered, and were starting to light the fires and whatnot, were obviously mixed together with people that, let's call them people that were there to demonstrate the protests, or possibly there just to go have a drink and hang out and take pictures of the protests. So there was a big mixing of all these different groups, and there was many thousands of people there. And for 2 or 3 hours, the police sort of let this action continue, where the fires got bigger. Bottles were being thrown at the police, who were on the edge of the neighborhood, And this sort of just continued to escalate, with the police not quite moving in. Now, we learned later that the police were essentially being cautious. They were worried about who might get hurt, so they say. They were also waiting for reinforcements to get these special, essentially special forces police in there, real riot police to sort of break up the situation. So when this finally did happen, 3 hours later, the police took over the entire street in an extremely violent manner. They were using their tactics. They were using everything from starting with water cannons to they were actually using tear gas as well, and that really caused people in the crowd to disperse quickly. Obviously, they had to use sort of heavy trucks to take out all the burning barricades. They had to put out the fires first. It was sort of a very chaotic scene of people running in all directions, trying to avoid getting hit by the water cannons, getting hit by, or their eyes were burning. I saw people with their eyes burning, running in every direction. A lot of people were trying to get into the bars or the cafes that are on that street, trying to get there for safety, which were obviously overfilled, so they didn't really have anywhere to go. People tended to get pushed down the side streets, but it was a very, very chaotic situation, and the police there was no conversations happening. There's no one telling the police, wait, I live here, I'm not being violent, just let me go. The police were not allowing for any exceptions. They were telling everyone to get out of the area. Occasionally they would announce something on the megaphone. No one could understand what they were saying. There was too much chaos going on. In the midst of all this, there's bombs, small bombs that are going off. There's huge explosions happening. So it was overall a very, very chaotic scene. I returned to my apartment as the police were clearing the street. From a balcony, I saw a lot of things. I live in a side street just off of Schulterblatt, and I saw that the police came in full-on, essentially riot gear, commando gear, and any person, whether they were a violent protester or not, was getting pushed up against the wall and told to go home and told to leave the area, or if the person was then walking in the direction of the police, they were often hit with these batons that the police carry, or they were kicked. I took a lot of videos and pictures, and I saw a lot of violence on the side of the police. And in my particular street, I did not see anyone dressed all in black with their face covered. There were some people that it's important to distinguish who was there, I think, because there were a lot of people that, so in my opinion, they're not necessarily prone to violence. They're not the ones that are looting the stores or destroying the neighborhood, but they're people that, if the police come in a violent way and try to clear out a whole area, these are the people that might end up throwing a bottle or two. I'm sure that's a subject that we'll talk about, whether that can be justified. But certainly a lot of the people that were involved, a lot of the people that the police were going after, throwing a bottle at the police is, of course, an illegal act. And a lot of the police were going after these people. But it's a question of whether the innocent people that are standing next to them, not throwing the bottle, are getting caught up in it. And from my view, that was happening more often than not. And the police were taking very violent actions to kick these people, to push them onto the ground, and then to walk away back to the main street, and 20 minutes later to do the same thing again. Come back up the street, running in force, screaming at everybody, kicking people. And obviously there was no real solution, because people would just continue to throw bottles as long as the police continue that sort of behavior. So that's what I saw Friday night, and it was some of my neighbors that were there standing on the street, watching everything go down, were also kicked and beaten by the police, despite the fact that they're just standing in front of their own front door, being peaceful. So there were a lot of people that were not necessarily directly involved in violence that got caught up in it, and the police handled it. They were very late to crack down, but when they did come, they came in force, and they were prepared for the worst riots Hamburg has ever seen.
All right.
All right. Yeah. Thanks. That was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we lived. We saw some of that, but Sean, living really in the Schanze, where all this happened, had a really good perspective on this.
I can add to that just from my own balcony where I was watching and taking some pictures of what was happening there. This tear gas was put onto my street, and my eyes were burning just sitting on my own balcony in my own home, which was sort of a shock to me that not even being on the main street, because like I said, I didn't see anyone wearing masks on my street at all. There might have been a couple people that threw some bottles, but tear gas seemed like a very hard reaction. I had to run inside, close all my windows, and wash my eyes out. So
shit. Oh wow. Well, I mean, I guess then we can get into the sort of the first topic of our podcast. I mean, we're actually 40 minutes into the podcast.
It's good.
So maybe we take a break and then we come back.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Take a break. Go get a coffee or whatever.
Yeah, go get a coffee. Yeah, whatever.
For you, there's no break.
Yeah, for you, there's no break.
But
See ya.
No, we'll never have a podcast again. Okay, see you soon.